I'm Ratho. Tonight I've got 3 true taxi ride stories that people swear are real. Listen close, and don't fall asleep in the back seat. I want to start with a story from a man named Aaron. He told this to a friend at a late-night bar, the kind of bar where people trade secrets and no one expects to be believed. Aaron drove a taxi for 10 years. He knew the city like the back of his hand, which streets to avoid, which lights were always against you, and which calls meant trouble. He also knew the smell of old sorrow. That night, the smell would come back. It was a Tuesday in November, cold and wet. Aaron had worked a double shift and was almost ready to go home when he picked up a rider at a hospital on the edge of town. The woman waiting at the curb was in her 50s, thin, and wrapped in a raincoat that had seen better years. She climbed into the back seat quietly and said one address: Oak Hollow Drive. She didn't give him a house number. She didn't look at him. She only hummed under her breath, a small tune Aaron couldn't place. The route to Oak Hollow took them past an old cemetery and then into a neighborhood of big houses with tall hedges. Half the streetlights were out. The driver's side window fogged when Aaron breathed. He glanced in the rear view and noticed the woman's hands were perfectly still folded in her lap. Her knuckles were pale, like she was holding herself together. "You okay back there?" Aaron asked, keeping his voice light. People tell you everything when they think you're just a car and not a living ear. She finally looked up. Her eyes were bright, and the first thing Aaron noticed was how tired they were. "I just want to go home," she said. "I've been gone too long." Aaron checked the address on his phone. The house he was supposed to go to had been empty for years. A foreclosure, then a bank-owned property, then left to the weather. The windows were boarded. The yard had a sagging swing. It didn't look like a place someone should get out at, especially someone her age. "You sure this is the place?" he asked. She nodded. "This is where I used to live. Turn here." Aaron hesitated. The GPS showed the route, but the street ended in an overgrown path and a gate that looked like it hadn't been opened in a decade. Hedges pressed the road so close it felt like driving through a tunnel. He turned anyway. The street light at the corner flickered and then went out. For a long moment, the only sound was the windshield wipers and the hum of the heater. When he pulled up in front of the house, the woman put her hands to the glass and said, softly, "It's exactly as I left it." Aaron didn't argue. He watched her step out into the rain. She moved slow, like a woman not used to walking, then climbed the broken porch steps and stopped at the top. She turned and looked back at the taxi, looked at him, and gave a small, sad smile. "Thank you," she said. "I can sleep now." And then she walked into the house. The door was unlocked. Aaron sat there in the car for a long time, rain drumming on the roof. He had done this job long enough to know when to leave people to their business. He pulled away slowly, easing through the hedge-lined path back to the main road. When he glanced in the rear view, the house was dark. No light behind the blinds, no movement. That should have been the end of it. But 2 days later, Aaron got a call to pick up at the same hospital. He arrived and recognized the woman waiting at the curb right away. She climbed in like she always did. "Back to Oak Hollow?" Aaron asked, more from habit than curiosity. She looked at him like she was surprised he asked. "No," she said. "Not yet. I have one more stop." He drove. The route took them past the cemetery again. The streetlights were still out, the road still slick. But when Aaron checked his GPS, the address the woman gave him was different. It was a house number from another part of town. one that had been the location of a small funeral home closed for years. He told her the GPS would take them a long way around. She only hummed and looked out the window. At the end of that ride, the woman stepped out at a house with a fresh wreath on the door. Aaron watched her through the rear view as she rang the bell. A man answered, surprised, and then his face went white. The woman smiled and whispered something to him. He started to cry. She turned and for the third time said, "Thank you. I can sleep now." After she left, Aaron noticed he had $10 and exact change in the meter that hadn't been there before. He chalked it up to being tired. But then, the next week, the same thing happened again. The woman appeared at the hospital, got in his cab, and after a ride or two, she would be dropped at a house where people would weep, and the house would have a wreath or some sign of mourning. Each time, Aaron would be left with the amount he'd started with, but a single coin or a note would be added. A quarter, a theater ticket, a photograph, Aaron told the dispatcher, and the dispatcher shrugged. "Must be some saint," he said, "or some ghost. Either way, take the cash." It went on for months. The woman was always the same. Raincoat, the same tired eyes, the same tune hummed under her breath. Aaron started to tell other drivers. Some said they'd seen her, others said they hadn't. But the strangest part was the way the city seemed to answer her. When she visited a house, lights would be on that weren't before. A neighbor would appear at a window. Someone would leave flowers. People would look relieved, like a long weight had been lifted. Then one night, after a shift that ran past midnight, Aaron stopped at a red light and saw her across the street. She was standing under the hospital awning, the same raincoat dark with water, humming to herself. He pulled over across from her and watched. She lifted her face and looked straight at him. "Did you sleep well?" she asked. He laughed nervously. Yes, ma'am. You do that a lot, don't you? Help people?" She tilted her head. "Do you want to see?" Aaron felt foolish, but curiosity pulled him. He followed her. She led him not to a house, but to the cemetery, past the iron fence, to a row of graves. She walked up to a particular stone and touched it. The name was Aaron. He blinked. "Aaron," she said softly, "you don't have long." He dropped his hand from the car door and stepped back. The air felt thin and heavy. "What do you mean?" he asked. His voice sounded small, like he'd swallowed it. She smiled sadly. "You've been doing a good job of carrying people to rest, but you can't run forever." "And you?" Aaron asked, his jaw tight. "Who are you?" She leaned close, and even though it rained, she didn't get wet. "I'm a fare," she said. "I'm the one who couldn't leave. But I learned the route. Now I help the lost find their homes. You'll be next." Before he could react, the light turned green and she stepped away. When Aaron looked back, the cemetery was empty and the gravestone with his name was gone, as if it had never been there. He quit driving 2 weeks later. He moved out of the city. He says he still sees a patient's room window glow at night and feels an urge to drive, to take someone home. He knows the smell of old sorrow. He knows the way a fare can look back at you and say thank you for doing your job. He never saw her again. But once, months later, he found a single coin on the passenger seat of his car.
It was a coin he had never seen before, hand-stamped, with a face he didn't recognize. On the edge, in tiny letters, it said simply, "Thank you." Twist. Aaron never found the grave with his name again, but one quiet morning, he woke to the wrenching sense of being late. He opened his wallet and found a faded hospital bracelet inside, with his name written on it in someone else's handwriting.
This one came from a woman I'll call Maria. She was a nurse and she worked nights at a hospice. Sometimes she picked up side rides to make extra money, mostly to cover bills. One night, a call came from the hospital valet asking if she could drop a patient home on her way. Maria agreed. She learned later that what happened on that drive was a story the valet would never say on the phone. It was a foggy night. Maria's cab was nearly empty aside from the patient, a quiet man in his 70s, wrapped in a thin blanket. He smelled faintly of antiseptic and mint. He had a stamped address card. The driver told Maria to just follow the map. The man seemed asleep, or maybe in a kind of half-sleep. He rode in silence. Maria turned up the radio to pretend company. The map sent them through roads she didn't recognize, narrow lanes flanked by old maples. She kept thinking she'd pass this way on other nights, but the GPS showed place names that didn't fit the city she lived in. She chalked it up to late-night delirium and the fog. Finally, the GPS said to stop. They were at an intersection with a single street lamp. The man pointed weakly. "Here," he said. Maria pulled in front of a small house. It was dark, with a sagging porch and a single light glowing in a second-floor window. The man thanked her with a whisper and tried to climb out. When she opened his door, he stepped out and looked up at the house. He put his hand to his chest and shivered. "Don't go in," he said to her, with a voice as thin as the paper in her pocket. "They're not inside anymore." She thought he was talking about his family, but then he made a motion with his hand, like erasing something from the air. The porch light flickered. The man's eyes filled with sudden fear. She asked, "Are you sure you want me to stay until someone gets you?" He smiled weakly. "Please don't. Let me go." Maria watched him move slowly up the steps. He knocked once on the door. No answer. He knocked again, harder. A light came on inside, and a woman's face appeared in the window. She looked surprised, then relieved. The man called out a name. The woman put the phone to her ear, and the door opened. Maria could hear shoes shuffle and the sound of someone racing down the hallway. The man turned back once. He looked at Maria like a man who had been saved. Then he went inside. The door closed behind him, and a lock clicked. Maria waited in the car, phone in hand. After what felt like too long, she knocked on the window and tried the door. It was locked. No sound inside. She felt a chill. Then she saw a light come on in another window, and someone peeked out. A child ran to the door in pajamas. The woman opened it, and the man was standing on the porch. Everyone smiled at him. Smiles so genuine, they made Maria's throat tighten. The woman hugged him. He stepped forward, and they embraced like a family is supposed to embrace. The woman kissed him on the forehead. The child stayed close. For a moment, Maria believed she had done the right thing. She had helped someone come home. She started the engine and turned to go. That night, the hospice called her. They were looking for the man she'd dropped off. They said he'd been declared missing earlier that evening from their ward, gone without a trace from his bed, no sign of struggle, just gone. Maria told the staff everything. They called the house's number on the card. The number was disconnected. The name on the envelope was wrong. The maps didn't match the city. Nobody she called could place the address. But then a fellow nurse, a quiet one named Lizette, stopped by. She was pale and held a folded paper. "I have something for you," she said. It was a newspaper clipping with a grainy photo. The headline read, "Local family found dead, no sign of intruder." The small print said the family had been declared deceased days earlier, a murder-suicide that made no sense. The location was the house Maria had just left. Maria felt her stomach turn. "But I saw them alive," she whispered. "They were just hugging him. They were crying." Lizette put a hand on her shoulder. "It was 3 nights ago," she said. "The family was buried 2 days ago. The man you took home, his name is on the obituary. He was found wandering near the highway, disoriented. The police brought him to hospice 3 nights ago. He never left until you drove him." A cold dread settled in Maria like a stone. The smell in her car had become too sweet, like old perfume and lilies. That night she kept hearing the woman's laugh, the child's feet. When her shift ended, she drove by the neighborhood. The house was dark and boarded up. The porch swing hung still. No lights, no wreaths, no signs of life. Weeks later, she got a call from someone on the other end, a private detective, hired by a family that said a loved one had returned home after years missing. The detective described the man she'd taken back. He spoke of a house where people would go in and never be seen again, and then somehow be back alive the next morning, lighter, like someone had taken a weight off their shoulders. Then the detective said quietly, "We found your cab driver's card at one house. The driver is alive. He's sleeping now. He keeps asking whether he should pick people up." Maria quit driving. She still sees, sometimes, a woman standing at the corner of her street, who looks like she's waiting for a car. The last time, Maria followed her to a house with a lit window, and for a second, she heard a child's giggle, the sound of plates clinking. Then a hush fell like a hand across a mouth. Twist. A month later, Maria visited the cemetery on an odd impulse and found a small plot with freshly turned soil. On the headstone was no name, just a date that matched the night she dropped the man off. Someone had buried the family that night, and the funeral guest list included one name, Maria. Her name was printed in the ledger as a witness. The last story is about a college student named Josh. He worked late shifts at a coffee shop and took cabs home if the trains were down. He was part-time, tired, and the kind of guy who trusted logic. He didn't believe in ghosts. That would change on a winter night when the city grid had a planned outage. One night the power went out across half the city. Streetlights blinked and everything seemed to pause. Josh called for a taxi when the app wouldn't load, and a local driver he recognized from the neighborhood arrived in an old sedan. The driver was an older man named Frank, a regular who still used cash. Frank didn't ask much, just where to go. Josh gave him the address and climbed in. They both laughed about the outage like it was a temporary inconvenience. It took them longer than usual to get home. The driver took back roads to avoid the dark intersections, and the car's heater rattled like something trying to start a conversation. The radio had nothing but static, and the driver said, "I remember when the city used to have lanterns." He had this steady voice that made Josh relax. At some point, the cab stopped. The driver pulled over and said, "You okay?" Josh looked out the windshield and saw nothing but a wall of fog and a single lamppost in the distance. "Are you sure I'm on the right street?" Frank smiled and said, "Trust me." When they reached Josh's building, a tower block with a blinking emergency light, Frank pulled up and turned off the engine. Josh grabbed his bag and reached into his pocket for cash. The driver held up his hand. "No rush," he said. Josh stood up and stretched. He noticed the driver's watch. It was an old digital watch with a cracked face. The time was 11:11. Josh thought nothing of it. He paid, thanked him, and stepped out. That's when the driver said, in a flat voice, "It's later than you think." Josh paused. He looked at his phone. No signal. The building's emergency light blinked a different rhythm. "What do you mean?" he asked. Frank shrugged. "You have 5 minutes," he said casually, as if talking about how long it takes the elevator to come. "Don't waste them." Josh laughed. He was tired. He walked toward his building, the cold air burning his lungs. He felt uneasy, like someone watched him from the corner of the street. He climbed the steps and fumbled with his keys. A man in a hoodie came out of the shadow and asked for a light. Josh thought it was a panhandler and held out a lighter. The man smiled, took the lighter, and said, "Thanks." He went inside and slammed the door. He thought about the driver's words and pushed them to the back of his mind. At 11:16, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number. The message was short. "Check the time." Josh checked his phone. The phone said 11:16. He laughed nervously. He shrugged and went to his kitchen to make coffee. The kettle clicked. The lights flickered back on. He breathed. At 11:17, there was a faint knock on his door. A man's voice called, "Hey, sorry, wrong house," and then walked away. Josh peered through the peephole and saw no one. It was a weird night, he thought. The city was odd. He locked the door and went back to the couch. Then his neighbor upstairs, Mrs. Alvarez, knocked. She was holding a casserole dish and looked upset. "Have you heard? Power's back, but the news said there was a gas leak in the building next door. They evacuated 3 floors." Josh's stomach tightened. "That's crazy," he said. "We're fine." Mrs. Alvarez put the casserole on a table. "I thought you were out," she said. "I'm glad you're here." After she left, Josh lay on the couch. He started to doze. At 11:28, he jolted awake to the sound of his phone buzzing. Another unknown number. "Don't open the door." His heart flipped. He called the number back. It disconnected. He got up and peered out of the window. The street was empty, silent. A single taxi idled at the corner. He felt silly. At 11:31, there was a pounding on his door. Someone trying to break in. He grabbed a bat and called 911, but the line was busy with emergency calls, and the operator told him to stay calm. The knocking got louder, angrier. Josh shouted through the door and demanded the person stop. The pounding eased, and then the building's intercom clicked on with static. A recorded voice announced, not in English, but in a weird, flat tone, "Time's up." Everything went dark. When the power came back on an hour later, the police were outside. They had cordoned off the building across the street. A gas explosion had flattened 2 floors. The numbers of the dead were still being counted. Josh was shaken but physically okay. He told officers everything. They asked about the taxi. Frank's cab was still at the curb, but the driver was gone. One of the officers, older and tired, asked Josh if he'd gotten a fare receipt. Josh dug into his pocket and found a crumpled slip. On it was written 1111 in shaky ink, and the driver's name, Frank. The officer's face went pale. "Frank?" he said. "He died in 1998, hit by a tanker. Used to drive the same route. People said he was a good man. He never missed a fare." Josh didn't sleep for days. He kept checking his phone, woken by messages that said things like, "Look at the clock," and "Don't stay inside." He moved out a week later. Twist. A year after, when Josh visited his old building to collect mail, the super handed him a small scrap of paper that had been slid under his door months earlier. It had been sitting there the whole time. On it was written in a hurried scrawl, "Thank you for writing. 5 minutes. F." Below that, someone had added, in different handwriting, the time. 11:11. Always. Which story scared you the most? Comment below and subscribe for more true horror stories.